Controversial. Compelling. The Tommy Schnurmacher Show. Hear Tommy live weekdays 9 to noon on CJAD 800.
Hi, this is Gerald Celente, and here are some of today's trends in the news.
He has accurately forecast hundreds of social, business, consumer, environmental, economic, political, entertainment, and technology trends, one of the most respected analysts and trends forecasters in the world, and he holds a black belt in a martial art we're not even allowed to tell you about. Gerald Celente back with a preview of Obama's second term, plus we'll look at Mali, Algeria, France, North Korea, what's next. Others speculate. TrendsJournal publisher Gerald Celente forecasts the future, and we'll see what it holds. Good morning, Gerald.
Good morning, Tommy.
Now, Gerald, I don't think we ever really asked you this in this manner. How exactly do you do what you do? How do you forecast these world events?
Current events form future trends. We just watch what's going on, but we look at information for what it is and not the way we want it to be. So we don't say whether it's good or bad, right or wrong. We just say what is. We're political atheists. So everybody's spinning the information. And then when you look at most of the information coming out of the mass media, you know, it's sex, death, and money. That's what they focus on. So, for example, with the G20 meeting that just happened in Moscow about the currency wars, which we've been talking about for years, you read what they really have to say rather than the spin that they're putting on, and you can see where it's going.
So,
and it's also making connections between different fields, and that's very important. An economist only looks at economic data primarily. They don't look at changes in the family, changes in the environment, geopolitical events. So we have a system we call Globalnomic, and it's making connections between different fields. As the saying goes, all things are connected like the blood which unites us all. So people take a one-dimensional view of the future, and we try to bring it all together.
Now, I noticed during the State of the Union address, you were live tweeting your opinion on everything the president had to say. Let's go through some of those issues. In general, what the president said about climate change.
Well, that to us is that's just sloganeering. It was nothing more than a campaign speech. We'll have to see what he really, when you talk about climate change, let's understand also that he throws something out like that while he's saying frack away, and where they gave over 700 million acres of public land to frackers. And then what will it be his decision on the Keystone Pipeline? So having worked in government and having, assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate, spending several years in D.C. as a government affairs specialist, you see what the spin is and how they try to soften the public with the line and then really do the other deed while they're not looking.
What about on the issue of the pipeline? The Wall Street Journal says that Obama might, in fact, okay the pipeline because he's safely reelected. And also there are a lot of the unions are on side with the idea, and he'll find a way to sell it. Do you agree with that?
My guess, and it's only a guess, is that he will approve the pipeline. And again, that's what I'm saying. If you're going to talk about climate change, you want to talk about producing some of the filthiest, sand tar on the planet, and it has nothing to do with climate change.
Okay, so the unions back the idea, so I think that gives them the cover. What about, we just got a text that says, Tommy, thanks for having my favorite guest back on. Gerald, how can the president say so many blatant lies at the State of the Union address, and there's not a giant revolt pointing out the outrageous hypocrisy of this tyrant? Americans and Canadians must wake up to the absolute destructive policies on every front of freedom and prosperity. Keep up the fight. That's from GC.
Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda, I tell you. No, they're never called up for anything. Look at the minutes that just came out from the Fed minutes from 5 years ago. Every one of the Fed people, the chairman and the heads of all the Federal Reserve banks, called the panic of '08 wrong. They never saw it coming. That's what you do in government. You can screw up as much as you want, lie as much as you want, and you're never held accountable for it. And chances are you'll get reelected. And that's just the way the systems are, and that's what really tells you where society is, that they permit this kind of behavior.
If you have any questions for Gerald Celente, 514-790-0991. Start talking. Text your question to 514-800. You had some interesting predictions about Mali. Could you tell me about that?
Yes, this is, the French can't get over the French Sudan trip from what it was about 1890 to 1960. And right next to Mali is Niger, where they're getting their uranium from. And 75% of France's energy is nuclear power. And this is, again, when we're looking at all of this, we're looking at the exploitation of colonial powers exploiting Africa again. That's all this is. And I mean, all of a sudden, we have to save the people of Mali. The words of Hollande, that the government asked us to come in. What government? You mean the guy that the United States was training that waged a coup attempt against a democratically elected government? No, it's just more imperialism, and it's everywhere. And all of North Africa is now destabilized since the United States and NATO destroyed Libya. Libya was holding this whole thing together. You remember that humanitarian mission, or to use the better words, a time-limited, scope-limited kinetic action? Who could get away with this stuff?
He gets them correct one after the other. Gerald Celente on the line with us, publisher of the TrendsJournal. Your latest edition of the TrendsJournal has Gerald Celente's 4 Rules of Peace. What are they?
Well, if you pick a fight the fight. All of these chicken hawk politicians, these presidents, prime ministers, and chancellors, that Assad, he got to go. We got to get rid of that Ahmadinejad. You want to take him out? You call them out, take them out. Keep me out of your psycho trip. Let's put a pay-per-view at the Arena di Verona, that beautifully restored amphitheater, Roman amphitheater in Verona, and let them fight it out. These guys never lead the charge. If it was good enough for Alexander the Great, for William the Conqueror, for Napoleon and Washington to lead the charge or leave me out of it. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2, if you're for the war, anybody out there, put up, pay up, and go and fight. Why should I go? I believe in the American Constitution about not getting involved in foreign entanglements. You want to go, you pay. And the third rule is the golden rule. Stop calling these people, vicious terrorists and on and on and on. Payback's a bitch. It's the golden rule. Do unto others. So when they attack you after you attack them, don't cry and scream and squeal. And the 4th rule of peace is let the people vote. You want to go to war? We don't have a Congress that represents the people. We have a gang of 535 senators and congressmen that represent the people, that give them the most amount of money. They call it campaign contributions. Adults call it bribes and payoffs, and they represent the most powerful. Let the people vote. If we're the ones where the burden of the war falls on our shoulders, rather than El Commander-in-Chief with their infallibility taking us to war. That's it.
David's got a question. Don. He says, so many people are forecasting the U.S. dollar will collapse, including you, because of the massive debt. The debt's about $15 trillion, but how can the U.S. default when it prints as much money as it needs, and it's still the currency of reference around the world?
I don't believe it's going to collapse, by the way. I've never said that. It's being devalued. They all are. I have in 1941, a fan sent me a 1941 Newsweek, a prelude to the war. And in there's an ad for the Waldorf Astoria. You could get a single room for $7 a night. It's a devaluation of the currency. They're doing it all over. All of the United States calls it quantitative easing. In Europe, they call it long-time refinancing operations and ongoing monetary transactions, printing money to keep the Ponzi scheme going. Look what's going on over in Japan with the new Prime Minister Abe. They're printing more money. They're lowering interest rates. So what they're doing is they're devaluing the currency, and they're doing it across the board. So all of the tides are being lowered, not only the United States.
All right, there's this one said, Gerald, the spin put forth by Wall Street and stock peddlers, but you've been wrong on many occasions in recent years about another financial Armageddon. What say you now? 2013, 2014, 2030, never? I think we're in a secular bear market. That's Dave.
You know what it is you don't know the deeds that are going on behind the game, so you get the call wrong because you think there's 56 cards in the deck and they're stacking it with 85. So, for example, how am I to know that behind closed doors, the Federal Reserve is dumping in $17 trillion with a T of money around the world to banks, whether it's the Bank of Scotland, Bank of Japan, Bundesbank, to all the banks in the United States under the radar of the people. So this is what I'm saying. You don't know what schemes undreamed of they're coming up with. Like, I can't make a name up like OMT, ongoing monetary transactions, pumping as much money into the system as you need. When will the crash come? I don't know, because they keep pumping it up and changing the game. But the long term is, Tommy, it's a devaluation of the currency. And once interest rates go back up, the whole game stops.
And when do you see interest rates going up?
I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, they're going to keep doing this. And by the way, China's doing it also, but they're doing it differently, and I believe smarter. They're spending the money and building their infrastructure, and they're giving the banks, easy loans as well. But at least they're putting it into a productive use. Where in the United States, for example, they're just blowing the stuff up in foreign countries, and in Europe as well, just giving it to the banks. So at some point it has to end. When, I don't know.
We can continue a discussion. Questions about the Federal Reserve, and someone wants to know how Gerald stays so passionate, railing against things that will never change. A very interesting question coming about Elizabeth Warren. That's coming up next.
Now, I know there have been some landmark settlements, but we face some very special issues with big financial institutions. If they can break the law and drag in billions in profits and then turn around and settle, paying out of those profits, they don't have much incentive to follow the law. It's also the case.
That's Elizabeth Warren. I think we've got a question about Elizabeth Warren from Tom, who's calling us from Napierville. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, and thank you for having Gerald on. Gerald, I've listened to Elizabeth Warren. Is she actually somebody who can get something done, or is this window dressing?
It's window dressing, and when you watch that video clip, all the softball questions going back and forth, and it's like high school. The word justice is being misspelled. It's Justus, just us. You haven't seen one head on Wall Street roll. And as she points out, all they do is give them a fine, and the fine amounts to chump change. Try this one on. How about the LIBOR scandal? How about, I got the forecast wrong. I knew that they're rigging $700 trillion worth of mortgages, loans, and from a small group of people around the world, not only in Europe but in Japan as well. The whole game is rigged, and they're getting away with it. It's a takeover. 4 words changed. This isn't capitalism. Too big to fail. The merger of state and corporate powers is called fascism, and that's what you're seeing played out. It's punishment to the fullest for all of us, and they get a free ride.
What about the issue? Somebody sent the text about the American banks have about $100 trillion in derivatives. What happens if that's a flop?
Well, it's going to be a flop, and that's what Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, one of our contributors, former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Reagan, is writing about. At some point, this is unprecedented in modern history, where they are doing these kind of scams in front of everybody's eyes. And this whole experiment about dumping all this money into the system, bringing interest rates at record lows, this has never been done before. At some time, it's going to collapse. But again, who would have believed that the entire interest rate game was rigged? Probably is still being rigged, and again, not one head rolls.
Ask Gerald what he thinks of the Federal Reserve. That's from Mark.
It's a criminal operation. That's the way I look at it. It's a bank takeover. You go back, Tommy, and you look at American history from the very beginning. Madison, Jefferson, all of them, essentially, with the exception of Hamilton, of course, the greatest fear in the United States was that a central bank would take over. And that was the major campaign issue throughout the 1800s. And then, of course, on that winter night, the night before Christmas, when no one was in Washington in 1913, they pushed through the Federal Reserve Act, and that the rest is history. It's a criminal takeover. Again, a room at the Waldorf Astoria for $7 a night in 1941. You want to see what's happening to your earnings and your wages? The dollar stayed almost, I think it lost like 5% of its value in the first 100 years.
Last question. Ask Mr. Celente what his predictions are regarding the new Egyptian government and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Our executive editor, John Anthony West, just came back from Egypt on Sunday. He was there for 3 weeks. And we're going to be doing a whole story on it. But he said essentially the people hate Morsi. And the systems are breaking down. He's been going there for many, many years. If you Google in Mystery of the Sphinx, John is the fellow that has proven that the weathering at the base of the Sphinx is 10,000 years, was water erosion, which brings it back to at least the end of the Ice Age. And he said the conditions there are declining at a level that he's never seen before.
This is the Tommy Schnurmacher Podcast. Listen to the show live, weekdays 9 to noon on CJAD 800.